Welcome to the new podcast, The Laboratory, or Laboratory, however you want to pronounce it. Today we have special new guest, Octavian, and maybe co-hosts, maybe also guests. I don't know where this is going, but we have Balormage and Jousis, who will be helping me today extract all of the delicious little game dev knowledge that we can out of Octavian's amazing brain. It should be noted that Octavian is a game designer at GGG. He is not a lead creative. He is not the CEO. There are going to be questions that he cannot answer by merit of his position at the company, and his position at the company also entitles him to his own opinions, and they are not the opinions of the company itself. So, fantastic disclaimer out of the way. Please don't take everything he says as gospel. You're going to anyway.
I mean, that, and also there may be some questions that come up, and I'm just gonna have a disappointing answer of, sorry, I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know is a perfectly acceptable answer, as opposed to lying.
Yeah, no, I won't engage in that. I'll engage in not knowing things.
If we make stuff up, you got to make it so ridiculous no one would believe it. No, as it came out of my mouth, I realized people will believe it anyway. We can't do that.
That's an impossible task, sir.
Yeah, no, never mind. As I was saying it, I'm like, no, that doesn't work. Actually, people will just believe it.
I can't even make a joke because they'll take the joke seriously.
Yeah. All right. So the first most important thing I want to know is, what is your actual job title? Because I keep not knowing quite what to call it.
Well, job titles are something of a fluid thing at GGG anyway. Like, I have worked across a lot of different things within the company, you know? Like, I've worked with the community team because I had the history in streaming and I know the PoE community relatively well. I did a lot of appearances at conventions and stuff like that. But I've also done a ton of testing work. I've done a ton of design work at this point. I've worked with the audio team and helped write voice lines for, characters being put into the game. I don't know. I work across a ton of different things. I've even been involved to some degree in like helping go over resumes and stuff for new QA and that sort of thing. Like, I've touched a lot of different parts of the company at this point.
Oh shit, so you're the reason I never got a job.
Probably not.
Given he was at the console playtests that I went to.
Yes. So
he was helping resolve technical issues and such.
Yeah, that, and it's sort of the perfect confluence of things where I have a history of being able to talk about the game competently. I know the game rather well now from having worked on it a bunch, and I have a valid US passport. And a lot of the events that we do are in like LA or something, so it's just much easier to get me on a flight there than it might be somebody else at the company.
That's fair. The good news is you're just as confused about your job title as I am.
Yeah.
I can talk about specific things I've worked on, but
fair.
I'm just going to keep going with game designer because that generally gets people interested at the very least, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, I have done game design work, a good amount of it.
So do you still wish that you could stream as much as you currently used to? Like, you used to stream a lot of PoE, you used to react to patch notes, you used to interact with the content and the community a lot more than you currently do. Is that something you miss, or are you thankful the little shits aren't your problem anymore? Or
I wouldn't phrase it that way. I can still stream. I do occasionally, maybe once every few weeks or something like that. But yeah, it's certainly a much different dynamic, and so there's some things I miss and some things I don't. I don't miss not knowing whether or not, I'd make 3 times my cost of rent for the month, or I'd make half my cost of rent for the month, because the income from streaming was so irregular, as I'm sure other people in the podcast can relate. What I do miss is being able to genuinely express an opinion of mine without it being taken as something that's like, this is what GGG thinks. And I sort of get that from the perspective of players because I am, I'm not a top level decider of things, nor even like a strong and significant voice on broader topics within the company, but I'm there. I can, if I have a problem with a thing in the game, I can just talk to the person working on that problem. So yes, obviously I do have some input. But that doesn't mean that every opinion that I have is just going to become a game mechanic in 2 weeks. But it can be interpreted that way sometimes when I'm streaming.
A little less freedom of speaking.
Yes. But
This is a great segue into the silliest question that I have to ask.
Sure.
Which is this has to do with the difference between now that you're a GGG employee and you didn't used to be. At the first ExileCon, you covered Slippery Jim 8's $15 at Subway, and he still hasn't paid you back. Now that you are a GGG employee, is it too late for him to pay you back? Like, is it unethical to receive payment?
Yeah,
from
I'm
PoE
going to
players?
consider that money gone. It's okay.
Yeah. Slippery Jim has successfully waited long enough that he can
any
keep
money spent on
$15.
Subway, any money spent on Subway is a waste of money anyway. There's my hottest take
Fair
for
enough.
the stream.
Fair enough.
Oh,
All right, that was my silliest question.
I really hope
got it
this
out of the way.
podcast isn't sponsored by Subway. Cardio.
I think we
What
had
if
to
I
announce
said it was?
That'd
You're
be
in
so
for an awkward
funny.
conversation.
Delete the VOD, start over.
Yeah.
Well, like, what's your favorite build in the game at the moment?
It's a tough one for me to answer specifically right now. I've actually rerolled 3 times since League start because there's just so many different builds I want to play. I'm currently playing a Blade Trap of Greatswords build using Spectral Throw of Charthus for clear, which has been working fine. I haven't had that much time to play, so I've got my first 2 Watchstones. I still need to kill Maven and Uber Elder. But I'm tempted to reroll again. I want to play Shield Crush of the Chieftain. It might be Shield Crush. Shield Crush it's such a straightforward and simple skill, but
Good for us.
it's snappy, it's responsive, it feels really fun to use, even though it's just Hitman with shield.
It's been 1 week and you work full time and you're still playing the live servers and have rerolled 3 times in a week.
Yes.
Yep, no, that's standard. That's
Man gets shit done.
Yep.
That's just how that works, yeah.
That is the PoE experience.
I'm not super far in, but I don't know. My first build I didn't get too far. I was playing Absolution and it is undeniably powerful. It got me into like red maps on a 4-link, but it just wasn't my playstyle. Had to swap.
So do you obviously know things that we as the rest of the community don't know going into a league. Like, for example, you knew presumably what all the new uniques were going to be. Is that
I could have known.
Oh, you just chose not to.
I didn't really have the time to dig into that and unique design. So I designed the uniques, the mercenary uniques specifically, the ones that can only show up for mercenaries. But any other unique was not something that I was working on design-wise. So, and I had too much other stuff going on to really delve into the details of everything else being done for 326. So yeah, I was aware of a couple of them. The 2-hand sword that causes stars. That one I was aware of because it just looked badass, and I saw some clips floating around in the office. But yeah, other than that,
an axe now?
Oh, sorry, an axe. Yeah, no, it's probably been an axe the whole time. I just misremembered.
That one does look fun.
I definitely thought it was going to be a spell that triggers another attack, which changes how it works dramatically.
Mm.
And the game
has been what, double cast on crit with that or something?
Yeah, you can do double cast and crit, or you can just actually get to mono scale 1 damage type rather than having to scale multiple different things, which has always been the problem with cast and crit.
Yeah, I mean it's sort of like Namahu's, right? It's like a
yeah.
It's like a Namahu's for a modern day.
Yeah, except it looks way cooler.
Exactly.
The cooler Namahus.
It's that old Daniel, cooler Daniel meme.
Exactly.
Anyone else got anything they want to ask before I monopolize all of Octavian's time?
Keep going. We've got
Keep going.
only 2 hours. We'll
I
ask as
mean,
many questions as we can.
on the topic, just adjacent to that, of knowing things before going into the league and that influencing what I want to play. In this particular case, the only thing is there were a lot of Chorthan gems that I really wanted to play because I
Mhm.
was designing those, and generally speaking, I try to design things that I think are cool.
Okay. Troth
So-
and Bladefall. Did you
Mhm.
go into it specifically not like I wanted that to be like Blade Death Aura, in that just everything that got near me was affected by essentially a hit dot. But it seems like it's
Okay.
more pitched as like this sets up your Blade Blast. This is like a convenient trigger mechanism. It seems very hard to actually make it a single target damage thing. You go into certain skills not planning on having them be single target. Am I just bad and I can't make it work? Like,
Well, there's probably some mechanism to make it work because there's so much damage scaling in the game now through various means that people can kill uber bosses with default attack, right? Like eventually with enough money thrown at the problem. But yeah, that caveat aside, it is relatively low damage, and that is partially because it does bring a lot of utility. But like that, a lot of the time, an idea will evolve significantly over the course of developing it. Like it's not like I have an idea for a thing and I have this really like this is how it's going to work at every detail and every stage. No, I'm working with VFX artists, and I'm working with programmers, and I'm working with other designers, and I'm getting feedback from QA, and any of those people, and possibly even others who are just onlookers and happen to chime in, can bring valid feedback to change how a skill works, because I'm just one person, and you know I'm inevitably going to have blind spots. So I wouldn't say that there's any skill where I like go into it with a super strong vision of this is exactly what it's going to be. It's usually, and design processes will vary depending on person to person, but for me, usually the first guiding principle, the like North Star that is the start of the process is this cool? And that isn't the only rule that matters. There's plenty of other considerations that come further down the line, but like that's the first thing. Like, if that turns out false, if there's not some hook that makes it interesting, then I probably just won't pursue it unless we like really need to for balance reasons or something, make some change like that. Obviously, also matters.
I had a
Starting from
question that
easy
was
cool.
very similar, where it's like, you want something to be in the game because it's cool, and then sometimes it's too good. Like the thing that makes it cool is somehow unhealthy for the game, but you really want it to stay in because it's cool, but it's unhealthy for the game. And it's like, how do you make that determination?
Well, it's highly subjective, right? I feel like I can't lay down a rule that's going to apply to every case. It's I guess it's about the lesser of two evils, because throwing away a cool idea is an evil in its own right, Like, so it's kind of about the extent of the damage that it would cause in whatever capacity it's causing damage. I understand that's a relatively vague answer, but it kind of has to be, because
Mhm.
when you're talking about something that's creative and subjective like that, I can't just say it does 7 damage to the meta, so therefore it needs to go away.
Yep, fair enough. That's why I put this in the serious questions, not the silly questions.
I imagine something comes out relatively often. I mean, I guess not often recently because it was like a year, but like relatively often, you don't even know something is unbalanced really until
Oh,
a few
I
hundred
mean,
thousand people get their hands on it. Like,
yeah, that happens all the time. Like, we have a lot of very competent people who play the game quite a lot at the company, but there's a few hundred people at the company, and a lot of those people are also artists or something who maybe don't even play the game at all. So
like
you just can't find every interaction, especially
you or GGG would have you found broken things before that they weren't expecting when you weren't working
oh,
on it. But
sure,
like
yeah.
you just find one here or there, and 70 get found. You happen upon one of them. Like you can't. 200 people is never going to find what 200,000 people do. But
Yeah, and then there's also some things that just simply don't become evident until it's at scale. Um, yeah, which is why we have all sorts of tools internally for like collecting, data on people playing and stuff, like how many of X skill is being used by Y people or whatever. I don't want to go too into detail on that because simply I'm not well enough informed on it. We have people at the company whose entire job it is to like pour through that kind of thing, and that's not my job. I ask them for numbers.
Yeah.
Just to focus the questions, if we end up getting questions in chat a little bit later, could you tell us like what are some of the things you've worked on recently so that people know what you're particularly knowledgeable on?
So most recently, I guess, um, I don't know we don't really have an official term internally for it, but I was the person spearheading the design process on Mercenaries, like the league mechanic, not the entire release.
Yeah.
As well as I did a bunch of, I mean, not as recently, but I've done a bunch of changes to the Atlas, to Scarabs, if we're talking PoE1 stuff, to Atlas, to Scarabs, I did the Valdo maps a while ago. That was probably my first big design project. There's stuff that's escaping me, I'm sure. For PoE2, I mostly work in the realm of skills and supports and that sort of thing. Like player character balance and player character tools, like skills and supports.
So you said you worked a lot on skills. So I've noticed a lot in the balance changes that are made recently that when a skill gets adjusted, or notably when a transfigured version of the skill gets adjusted, in this case I'm particularly thinking of Molten Strike of the Zenith, it tends to be the case that the equivalent skill is also adjusted, even if that's so regular Molten Strike was nerfed at the same time as Molten Strike of the Zenith. Is that because there's some kind of connection in GGG about how those two should be balanced, or was regular Molten Strike separately considered to be overpowered despite the community not being as interested in it?
I don't know if I can speak to this on like those specifics on an expert level, because the player skill balance changes that were done in this league were not done by me, with the exception, I guess, of the introduction of the Trarthan gems. Anything outside of those, I didn't change. There's not, as far as I'm aware of, some sort of internal doctrine or rule that if a change is made to a transfigured version of a gem, that the regular version of that gem must also be changed or looked at or something. So my assumption would be that, yeah, the assessment was just made that regular Molten Strike was also overtuned to some degree. As to the reasoning behind that, I can't say specifically because I didn't make the change.
But is there like some big spreadsheet at GGG that says like, hey, Molten Strike is deserving of X percentage of damage effectiveness, Molten Strike of the Zenith is 1.2 times better, therefore worth X percentage less damage effectiveness? Or is that not really how the balance is done there?
There have been many spreadsheets over the years, and there will be many
I'm
more.
remembering one in particular. There was one league where they specifically went through and balanced the like mana cost to base damage and damage effectiveness of all the spells all in one patch and tried to make them like relatively equal. So that was one instance of a spreadsheet, I think.
Yeah, I mean, again, I can't speak to that specifically. I think that was even before I joined the company, if I'm remembering the patch that you're referring to, right?
Yeah.
But like, one of the number one truisms, I guess, about working on a live service, at least as far as I understand it. Again, this is the first game dev job that I have had, so I may be coming at this from a relatively naive angle as compared to someone who's an industry veteran who's jumped around from a few companies or something. But you can't really hold too dearly to any one individual thing, because you're providing a product that needs to constantly evolve. And so maybe that's too vague and broad level an answer to what you're asking to be satisfying, but I would say no, there's not really like the one true spreadsheet to which all things in the game, all balance must adhere. It's more like it is subjective, and that can be really, really frustrating for a lot of people. Even internally, that can be really frustrating because people are looking for the correct answer when often there isn't a correct answer. There's a field of correctish ones, and your job as a designer is to try and narrow it down to what the best situation is rather than get every single specific correct.
It's mostly just done on feels and your intuition as a designer then.
Oh no, there's definitely a lot of spreadsheets in math. But like that doesn't it's kind of a combination. Like you can you what you're constantly trying to do is get a frame of reference in which everything can subjectively make sense when compared to one another. But there is no like objectively correct number for the video game to have because it's all pixels on a screen that we make up and agree is good. Like you have to you can't come at it from the furthest back subjective position or else nothing makes sense and it all doesn't matter. But if you can get into a subjective framework, if you can make that decision of saying like here's the top end, here's the bottom end, okay, let's comparatively balance things between them or whatever. And again, this is very, very broad. That's a really, really hard step to take, and you have to I feel like I'm not expressing this well. You have to be able to be confident in the assumptions that you're making because any balance is going to have assumptions.
So this isn't actually on our list, but it's super relevant. And it would be great if you tell me I'm an idiot because that's also fine.
You're an idiot, Ella.
I've had this like duality stuck in my head for a little while of I now know several people and have talked to a lot of people who work at GGG. It's a building full of people who are smarter than me. And at the same time, every single time leagues come out and there's like a balance patch, I feel like when I look at skills, that it just wouldn't be that hard to balance a whole bunch of skills all up to be relatively good at the same time. I'm wondering why I'm stupid, why you can't just number tweak every underused skill and just have that suddenly work. There has to be like a reason, because if it was as easy as it seems like in my head, it'd be done. Because it'd be done.
Well, if you could unilaterally, it kind of gets back to what I was saying. If you could unilaterally decide, this is what correct is, this is the framework in which I'm working, let's adjust everything to at least meet that base standard of correct, then yeah, you could probably do that in a month, but 20 other people are going to tell you you're wrong. And 100, 1,000 other people are going to tell you you're wrong. It literally does not matter what subjective stance you take. There will be thousands of people who tell you you are incorrect. That's kind of what I'm getting at when I say you have to have the confidence to believe that your framework that you're balancing around and within is generally robust and good. I feel like that's kind of what is happening, and you're one of those people saying this isn't quite right.
Yeah, but it's like I said, it sits in my head at the same time that I'm like, well, I know tons of people who work, like I know they're all smart. I know this could just be fixed if it was just like, oh, it's that easy, it would be done. But I can't figure out why it's hard. Like my brain doesn't know why.
I think
That's fair.
people have different definitions of fixed.
Exactly. That's kind of what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Yeah.
So is the problem that you're not very partial to like temporary solutions, right? Like people were complaining about melee being in a terrible spot for years, frankly, and a lot of people were just saying, well, why don't you just go through and take the damage effectiveness of every melee skill and increase it by 300%? And melee's fixed because suddenly melee does 3 times as much damage. Or take the base attack speed of every melee skill and triple it. But GGG seemed to be waiting for a much more robust rework. Like they added the rage mechanic and they reworked a lot of ascendancies and they changed how attack animations worked, and that you seem to be waiting for that rather than going for the temporary fix. Is there a particular aversion to those kinds of temporary fixes?
Well, that is something of a directorial level question that I may not be able to answer extremely well. I can offer a personal opinion on it, but I can't speak to like the company's direction or something because I'm not the director. I'm not the person who determines that.
In order to spare Octavian having his opinion taken as GGG opinion, I can give my personal opinion, which is almost certainly the same opinion, which is that such a drastic change like that might like rock the boat more than you would want.
To some degree, that one of the things that I think is personally so one of the reasons that I have always bounced off a lot of other ARPGs is because you reach a point of ridiculousness rather quickly, which PoE 1 can be accused of. Don't get me wrong. Even PoE 2 to some degree can be accused of, where you have damage numbers in the trillions, or you have, I think Diablo 3 at one point had to use scientific notation in order to show DPS values. And I'm not saying, oh, if we doubled all the melee damage numbers, we would do that, overnight. I'm more saying if you keep going for the easy fix and you keep doing that, then I mean you do reach that point.
One part or thing that I think applies to everything that I just learned ages ago running a print shop for a few years was any temporary solution becomes a permanent one.
It's very
that's a very common saying.
It's very hard for it not to, yes, because when something has a solution that is in place that is functioning, that's much easier to just leave it be and then move on to another problem which maybe doesn't even have any solution yet. And one of the things that I've learned in game development is you never run out of problems. When I was working in QA, the lead of the department, one of his favorite phrases is, "You can always find another bug." Like you have to eventually reach a cutoff point where you move on to testing the next thing instead of finding, that little tiny edge case bug where it breaks in this super specific situation, because otherwise there's going to be another thing that we didn't test and which breaks in this much less specific situation that 20% of the player base is going to experience or something. So like, yeah, you can always find another bug, you can always find another problem, and it's a good thing in the end, honestly, because it means we always have a game to develop. We always have more to do. The work is infinite. Sorry, I feel like I went a little off track there.
No, as a software engineer, I understand it being good that like, oh, there's always something to improve. Like you don't want to be like, oh, it's done now. It's there's nothing more to do. It'll be in this state forever. Like that's really sad.
I think that's one of the difference between like a live service forever game and something that's just gonna like come out and maybe have a patch or two.
I mean, it's even more true of a live service game because, and even just within my time at the company, I've only been here about 3 years now. There are things that I worked on when I was first getting to do design work that I look back on now and I'm like, oh God, that's awful. Oh man, I want to fix that. And I'm sure in another 3 years' time, I'll look back on, Mercenaries League and be like, oh man.
Do you want to out yourself?
No, that's a sign that you're improving.
What do you think's your worst thing that you're like, oh man, I wish I did a better job of that?
I mean, there's a divination card scarab which like causes the monsters when you kill them to spawn what we call internally daemons, which are essentially just untargetable enemies that do a thing. So if a boss, for example, the drowning orbs, those are daemons, just as an example. So there's a div card scarab that when you kill the monsters, they spawn like daemons that are like books that shoot cards at you, and they need work, man. no offense to like the VFX artists or the audio guys who worked on those. They look and sound great, but they do not play well, and that is entirely on me.
All right. I love that he just jumped into it and outed himself. I'm like, tell me something. Tell me what
you want to out yourself. Oh, here's what I did.
It's right here in my head. I would immediately.
The only reason that isn't already fixed is because I do not have infinity time, and there's a lot of other stuff to do. And this is the same thing that Jousis was just talking about. It's like, they function. They're fine. They're not utterly horrible. They're in the video game and they function fine. So they're a temp fix or the equivalent.
It doesn't go completely unused. It's not like no one's using them. So
But I'd like to go
Alright,
back and polish them. I mean, as a broader point, I would personally, and again, this is no indication of upcoming content. I would like to just absolutely preface that. But I would love personally to have the time to just go back and get another whack at scarabs because I think they are improved over where they once were, but they could still use more work, as always they probably will. Anyways,
Yeah, while we're in this lull between two questions, I want to explain. We kind of decided to do a bit before the podcast where we would just pronounce my name differently every time because I don't pronounce my name in any of my videos, and most people don't know how to pronounce my name. When it gets to the point where like people are trying to speak to me seriously and they get my name wrong because I've never told them how to pronounce it, now I'm like, okay, now I feel bad. Now I want to tell people how to pronounce it.
I'm going to
I
assume that I pronounced it incorrectly.
It is pronounced Jousis.
Jousis. Okay.
So, you know, I think it's funny the 15 different ways that people mispronounce it. So I haven't really bothered to correct people, but I don't want to deceive you somehow. It feels bad.
Don't worry, I don't feel deceived.
Trying to bring up a thing as a visual aid, but I guess I'll just ask the question anyway. So in the game at the moment, there is an steadily increasing number of mechanics that seem to have the tag cannot be blocked, evaded, or suppressed. The things that jump to mind are Maven Memory Game, also the Minotaur Slams in Uber Exarch, also the Volatiles in Tier 17s. They just have this tag that means, hey, no, these three major defensive layers that players have come to rely on, they just don't work here. Is that... Well, I guess, why would a tag like that be included on a particular ability? I get in the case of something like Memory Game, it's, hey, no, screw you fail the mechanic, go directly to hell. But some of these others seem a bit more survivable in many other contexts.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. So the broad level concept there is that there are going to be mechanics in the game that we want you to interact with, right? And we want you to, memory game explosion is a great example. Like there are builds that can, I'm sure, there are builds that can just stand in that, but most builds should have to interact with that because it's the boss mechanic and it's the one of the core things of the fight. But it is dangerous to draw that line, and you can't let it get too blurry, because then, as you said, it starts to get frustrating when things seem like something that aren't an out and out boss mechanic that you should have to pay attention to and engage with and keep your brain on for. So yeah, it may well be that there are some examples. I mean, I wasn't aware that the volatile cores in T17s had that stat, for example, if that's what you're referencing.
Very frustrating.
The mod. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, I wasn't aware of that. That doesn't seem correct to me. Again, don't take anything I say on the stream as promise that a thing will be changed or fixed.
At the very least, I should say PODB indicates this, and I have never survived one when I've been on a block build that doesn't have 90% fire res and 200,000 EHP. So I'm assuming the POEDB is obviously not a Bible reference.
Yeah, I mean, things on POEDB can be extremely misleading sometimes, because the way that our monsters are set up are often not intuitively straightforward and that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if that were the case. I just kind of agree with you that something like that probably shouldn't have that stat, but I'm not saying that stat shouldn't exist. There should be things that have it, because there should be mechanics that you have to manually avoid on the majority of builds. It's just probably those should be restricted mostly to big telegraphed things in a boss fight.
Yeah, I do like those on bosses. And like, yeah, there are certain builds that can face tank the Maven Memory Explosion, but like,
probably made 20.
I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like everything should be face tankable if you throw enough money. Everything is going to be an ignorable mechanic at some point when you've got dudes making 8 mirror builds with all of the best stuff. Eventually you become a god at some point. That's fine. It's a level most people don't reach ever. It would be only bad in my mind if you can trivialize that stuff early or on a cheaper budget, or like most people could do this. Like that's That's a problem.
I-
If you're spending 7 mirrors, I don't see it as a problem.
I think there's a really interesting tension there, though, because, and this isn't just as a developer. Like when I was on podcasts and stuff as well, I was hearing a lot both the sentiment that players want to be able to outbuild anything in the video game, but players also, like, I remember a podcast I was on back when Delve was coming out, or maybe a little bit after Delve. It was probably a little bit after Delve, and I think Grimro was on the podcast as well, and he was talking about how Delve had finally answered a prayer basically for content that could challenge the strongest builds in the game, and he was looking for like Giga Uber endgame content.
Mhm.
And that seems like a tension to me, right? Where like players want to be able to outgear every single thing in the game and become god immortals, but then nothing will challenge you anymore. And then you get players saying that the game is boring at the very top end and nothing is a challenge. And I don't see a way to square that circle.
I think there's a middle ground there, right? Like Grimro, I think, was just referring to the fact that for a while there, a Deadeye with a good tornado shot build, despite being relatively squishy, could just delete the entire screen before they saw anything. Because that's the build that he always played. And Delve stopped him from being able to do that always until he put the 7 mirrors in.
He was happy with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Is what I'm saying. Like he was happy that there was content. Like, and it is a bit of an outdated example. It's years ago at this point. But I just think, I don't know. Then it's part of why we have Delve with its infinite scaling, and then we add T17 maps, and we have T16 and a half maps, or whatever you want to call them. Like we're constantly pushing the envelope of the end game because players do want things that can challenge them and are maybe a little bit difficult to overcome. But then they want to overcome that thing and feel like now they're trivializing it. That's a huge part of the fun of an ARPG, at least for me, is like grinding through content and then going back a few levels or something, like putting white maps on farm and then putting yellow maps on farm and putting red maps on farm and getting to the point where you can trivialize it. So I do get it. I do understand.
Now you bring up tier 16.5s or whatever we want to call those.
Sure.
16.5 seems awkward, but I don't have a better name.
Originator maps.
Originator maps, yeah.
Yeah. Now we brought first of all, I absolutely love these things. I think this is one of the best things that have been added. I love them. As opposed to tier 17s, which I have problems with. But how do you end up somebody in the company at some point has gone, hey, we need to make a map that's halfway between the two, and we don't push it back a tier or anything, we just make like the same tier map. Like in my mind, the default would have been, oh, we'll push these 17s to 18s and we'll just make new 17s or something like that, instead of being like, here's all the tier 16s, but now at 0.5. Which is just half and half tier 17 mobs and regular mobs is what it looks like.
So that wasn't a system that I was super involved in the design for. I was kind of on the periphery of it. So I can only guess. And what I imagine is that, and one of the things that I probably shouldn't even guess, but like coming at it from the perspective of someone else within the company, I think it is a brilliant way of synthesizing existing resources to make something new. Where like, yes, we've made a handful of new bosses and stuff, but we're reusing, we're using existing tile sets on the Atlas, and we have a bit of a twist, and then we're using some existing modifiers as well with a bit of a twist, and like that is, when you put out content at the rate that we do, that is a very intelligent thing to do. And hopefully they're fun. I find them fun.
Oh, I love them, actually. They're my favorite.
Wish drowning orbs didn't exist.
Yeah.
I want to be able to stand up when there's no mobs around me. If a single like little abyss pustule thing shoots a little gremlin at me that my build can face tank for actually infinite amounts of time, but then it spawns a little drowning orb and I die because it has decided that my life flag has been set to 0. It's the more frustrating.
Well, not in defense of the drowning orb.
There is a pause feature.
But yes, you can pause the game.
Yeah, you can pause it now. Well, it's okay. This is only so you, I believe, did a bunch of the tier 17 work back in the day. when that got made. I have one little, I don't know. There's one major gripe I have with tier 17s that I want to ask you why it exists.
Sure.
We have right now tier 17s. Their drop is tied to specific maps. So like I have to run if I want Fortress, which I do this league because Fortress sells 2 to a div and all the others are 30 chaos each. So I generate a ton of maps. I would lose 70-80% of my profit if I move to any map that doesn't drop Fortress, which means I'm now stuck on only 20% of the Atlas. And I'm wondering why they're tied to specific maps at all, instead of just all dropping everywhere.
So I actually didn't make that particular decision, but I'm not trying to pass the buck here. I just want to be truthful.
Yeah.
Regardless, though, I do have an opinion on this. And I personally am always in favor of heterogeneity rather than homogeneity in content, because I find it much more interesting when, if I want thing X, I have to go farm content Y rather than being able to get thing X from 7 different places. It makes it much, much better. It makes it much, much easier for different mechanics and that sort of thing to have their own distinct identity. There was actually a push for this again before I joined the company a while ago, back when, like, I forget the specifics, but like a lot of league mechanics that were giving rewards that were from other league mechanics got those rewards removed and got their,
I do remember that big
yeah,
patch.
I don't remember the exact patch where it happened, but like, especially when you have a live service game that needs to keep things fresh and interesting and give people reasons to play all the different things that are in the game, you just kind of have to segment things out. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that in this case that design rule is correct. Like, maybe it's better for this reward structure specifically to be more homogenous, but as a general principle, I like having things more distinctly separated into, you get X thing by going to Y place and the other thing by going to the other place, and so on and so forth.
I think I also generally agree with that. It's just in this case, it feels like I'm locked to, when I farm maps now, I'm locked to only 20% of the Atlas. Whatever happens to be able to drop that map, that's my pool that I can look at. And like we can dry stuff now, so I can pick any cards I want, put them in any place I want, and control stuff there. But I don't get to pick my maps anymore.
I am curious.
My 3 favorite maps are all not Fortress, and I'm like, well, okay, I don't run them.
I think I'm not personally keyed in enough to the very top end of the softcore trade meta to be aware of why Fortress is worth so much more than the others. I'm just curious.
To be honest, I don't 100% know either, because I don't like running tier 17 maps. So all of my strategies are around generating it for the Jousis who want them. I think it's just the item that drops.
It's got slightly better density, and also it drops the most valuable Uber fragments. And the Uber fragments are like guaranteed return on investment for your T17. And on top of that, it's the only boss, as Necros just said in chat, it's the only boss that doesn't have multiple phases that slow you down.
That's fair. I'm surprised that together that makes that much of a difference in the price, but yeah, that does make sense.
The density is a really big factor, because tier 17s multiply your baseline drops so much that it's a huge profit multiplier for any strategy that's not like strong boxes where you're getting a linear number of monsters.
You have so many overlapping magnifications that any additional at that point, it's the same thing as making a build and scaling your damage and such. And just one more point on that, heterogeneity versus homogeneity of loot. It also helps to safeguard the broader economy of the game. So like, there are times where we introduce something into the game that's problematic to the economy, right? Like, the game's been around for more than a decade. It happens.
What do you mean? Rogue Exiles in Frisia was fine. I don't know what you're talking about.
Generally speaking,
Affliction was also fine.
The corners of the game that remain relatively unaffected by those things are the corners of the game where there's some valuable thing that can only be gotten from that. And that's part of why, in my opinion, it's so important to have heterogeneity of rewards, because it helps safeguard against, one strategy being the only dominant thing that's best to do. And like, there's going to be people who think that if there's a strategy that's 10% better than all the others, there will be a objectively best strategy. But it's a matter of how far behind everything else lags. And if there's like, what's an example of this?
The example I'm thinking of is what you mentioned earlier, where Legion used to give a ton of delve rewards. Like you would
Yeah.
get more fossils from doing Legion than doing delve, and so that's why it was changed.
Yeah, and now if you want to, maybe it's a slightly niche example because I play primarily in hardcore trade, though I'm not this league. But if like one of the strategies that a friend of mine uses in hardcore trade to make tons of currency every single league is he just makes a Pathfinder and gets tons of move speed and zips through Delve, picking up fossils and sells them to everybody who's trying to craft things.
Yep.
And
Yeah, I used
like
to.
if you could get fossils super easily from Legion still, then it would not be nearly as profitable to do that because you wouldn't be, living in a niche.
And that's not even completely removed. Like you still get some fossils from
You
other
get
places.
some, but like
Some, yeah.
imagine
Nowhere
if
near
we
as much.
found some new
Helping.
way to farm Legion like 3 times as efficiently, you get 3 times as much loot. Then now that's crowding out delve.
There are enough of the common fossils on the market now that that's not where your money is. You get your money from your Tink fossils, which are from like the
Yeah.
Gem fossil and the Divine fossil or whatever it's called. Like you tend not to make a huge amount of money out of the common ones, which are the like those.
Right.
The Tink fossils can't drop from other content; they only drop from the specific delve nodes.
See, that's a good decision in like it's one of the things that fixes my bad example.
It's
Like
a
I
really
cherry picked a bad example.
it's a really, really difficult principle to stick to as well, because when you're reworking a system or you have this new mechanic or whatever and you want to make it rewarding because you want players to engage with it, it's super easy to just go, well, here's this thing players already want and like. We could just put that here, do that, quick and easy. But in the long run, it bites you in the ass, which is why it was, why there was that patch a couple of years ago or whatever to roll some of it back.
Yeah. God, I wish I could remember what that patch was. It was huge. It separated so many things back.
Is that like part of the reason why, like when you put Ultimatum back into the game, you pulled out Metamorph? Is that just because, hey, here's an easy reward mechanism that no one really likes the source of right now, let's put it somewhere else?
That was kind of an extra bonus, to be entirely honest. It was also partially just that Metamorph was, it was a bit jank, had some problems, and it would be really nice to be able to bring back something like that concept again in the future. But again, that's a game director level decision. That's not something I'm going to be able to promise or even decide on.
So talking a little bit more about tier 17s. Right now, tier 17s and originator maps, now that they have all of the tier 17 mod bonuses, are pretty much the premier way to make money at this point in the game. However, the mods, despite how powerful they are, you can get 200% more currency drops, 200% more scarab drops, 200% more map drops. They don't affect a lot of methods of gaining rewards in the game. For example, if I have 200% more currency drops on my map and I kill a Harbinger, I get the same number of shards. Is that
Sure.
Is that considered a problem in that, like, this huge reward multiplier was put in the game but doesn't affect certain pieces of content, inherently thereby making that content lots worse? Or
sorry, I'm leaning away from my mic. That is more a result of a functional restriction, I would imagine, than a specific design decision. Because the way, without going too into the weeds, the way that Harbinger drops its items is fundamentally different than the way that currency in the like just a monster dropping a currency item functions. And so it's just likely that multiplier was not extended functionally to the way that Harbingers drop their currency shards. As to whether that was a conscious choice or not, I would have to ask the other designer, who I won't name because they might not want their name public, who was working on that with me.
incredibly reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, I know Harbinger gets excluded from a lot of things. As far as I know, it's the map rarity and quantity affects it, and then that's it.
I don't even know that that's true.
It does. If you run them white, you get nothing.
Yeah, fair enough.
But
Certainly,
I-
the totems are not affected by quant. They always seem to drop like 2 or 3 stacks each.
The ones from the scarabs, the obelisks.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean those are using.
I think they use a
Again,
title star reward. Yeah.
I don't want to go too into the weeds, but they're not dropping items in the same way that just a monster randomly dropping an item would.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have internal names for it. What at least I call them is like tile-based rewards when I talk about things like that.
Oh, like there's a fly in my room, so that's why I'm swiping at things randomly. The like the random rewards that you get on like a Legion monster or something.
Yeah, or like delirium stack, like when that stacks up or anything, like those sort of things that don't like if I'm running a 300% quant map, it doesn't that specific reward doesn't really scale with it. I just call all of those tile-based rewards. I don't know if there's a real word for it, but it's like don't bother stacking pack size for these things.
Yeah, I mean
Rarity
that
and
is
for them.
that is relatively close to the internal term, which is a template.
That's fair.
Wasn't sure if I would be outing the designers I talked to at ExileCon if I started calling them templates.
I mean, it still doesn't really like tell people much about the
Doesn't.
function to know a name, but yeah.
Pack size is actually one of the things that does work for some tile mechanics because, like, if you have pack size on a Legion, you get more sergeants, which give you more tiles.
Yeah, I mean, having different mechanics scale differently is not inherently a bad thing because, again, it can create. One of the things that I love about Path of Exile's endgame is that you have the ability to like burrow down into specific niches and specific edge cases and because that's what I love about building a character, and it also kind of applies to building an endgame strategy. So, like for instance, right now, what I am personally doing on live is I have all of the nodes for increased chance to get Kirak missions on completing a map, as well as increased chance to get log or scouting reports. Sorry, that's what those are called. And I'm just trying to get all the what was previously memory line missions as Kirak missions and farming those for tons of harvest juice or temple items or whatever. And it's probably not nearly as good a strategy as anything related to, I don't know, just juicing your maps more straightforwardly, but I'm finding it very fun.
Yeah. And having it not all scale the same lets you do stuff like, hey, you can run tier 7 essences.
Oh, yes.
It's not the best strategy in the world, but you'll make 5 or 6 div an hour, and you can do it on a weak character. You can use it to go make a more powerful one. And you just get to run those maps scoured if you want. Like, it's fine.
One of my favorite money-making strategies was back in Scourge League. I played MF Death's Oath, and I just ran through white maps with a bunch of quantity and rarity gear. Just played Walking Simulator, picking up currency off the ground. It was fun.
I have to give Death's Oath a go this league. It got buffed.
It was completely incapable of doing like even a T10 map, but it could stack MF gear and do T5 maps, and that was good enough to generate
Every
lots of
single
money.
time Death's Oath gets buffed. It's been buffed a large number of times at this point. It gives me a little bit of hope. I put it into POB and it's never there. Never makes sense.
You may have to adjust your expectations as to what
every
Death's
time
Oath
they
is
buff
for.
it, it's just to keep it at roughly the same baseline.
I have before spent like several hundred div, mage blood and everything to make a Death's Oath build that will comfortably, with no other skill, farm tier 16 maps with juice in them. It can be done. It's expensive. The character's squishy and you have to pay attention, but it can be done.
I could never.
I found that when you're putting that much amount of investment into a Death Aura build, at that point you may as well just be scaling the crap out of AoE on RF, and you have the same result, but 3 times as much damage.
But then it's not purple.
Yeah, but then it's not, I did this not because it was efficient, but because I wanted to.
So, yeah, this is a disconnect that I feel I have with a lot of people in the PoE community, where like, especially when I was a streamer, I would be playing a given build which was just objectively worse than some other similar build, I'd get people in my chat asking, "Why are you playing this?" And when you could be playing the other one, and it's like, because this one looks cooler, man. Or like
That's
it plays, I don't have to aim as hard or something. Like
You seen what the game looks like when you have Celestial RF that covers the entire screen? That shit's awesome.
I can't see the game when I'm doing that.
I'd rather Death Note.
Isn't that
It
the
doesn't
point?
have it's just this little purple circles under everything, and it doesn't obscure my screen. It's great.
half of my viewership is because people are like, "What not correct thing is he building this time?"
Yeah, sometimes
Today
the fun...
I played a build that lagged the peninsula map boss still has allies can't die.
Mhm.
And I'm playing a build that does a spellcast loop with lots and lots of projectiles and hits. And so I took, I think, 20 minutes to kill that boss because I slowed the instance down so much that it took a few minutes to catch up when it was done.
Oh, good lord.
I think I took a pretty similar amount of time because I have the.
You can't see anything.
I'm using Dark Monarch for 20 carrying golems, and I fairly intentionally, just didn't really consider what I was doing. Put time to up the stakes. Maven summons 3 extra bosses thing.
Oh, yes.
Onto Peninsula, and she summoned, I think, Piety, who summons her little like corpse explosion globule things.
The eye hatcheries.
It summoned Dodri, who summons the curse pillars, maybe. She summoned 3 things that also then summon more ads. And my golems just, under no circumstances, were interested in the actual Peninsula boss and were just attacking everything else that could not die.
Gotta get yourself a predator support, or whatever it's called. Signal prey?
Mark, right? Yeah, Signal Prey puts on the death mark. Yeah, I should have done that. What had the portal have to do? That Dark Monarch is possibly the single. All the uniques that were added this patch are so good.
Good.
Please
as
don't
I said,
nerf
I
them.
didn't work on them, but
I won't have time
I'll
to
pass
use
that
them all.
along.
I'm sad because they are really, really cool, and I love them. And the Holy Relic one is not.
That's a good problem to have. There's too many cool new things for me to try in a reasonable time frame.
Yeah, I'm just sad because the one for my build isn't worth using. Because it doubles all minions, right, of a specific kind. But Holy Relic only has 3 to begin with, and one of them comes from the helmet.
Yeah.
So when you swap the helmet out, you go down to 2 and then only up to 4. So you're only gaining 1. Instead of going from 3 to 6, you go from 3 to 4, and you lose all your support minions. And you're like, it's actually not worth it. Oh no, I can't use.
But Balor, 4 bigger than 3, therefore good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, what we need is a unique that makes the Exile grow a second head, and then we put a helmet on that one too.
Yeah.
And then you get 6 relics. That definitely wouldn't cause any technical problems or balance issues whatsoever. You shouldn't consider the problems that would cause before you implement the game.
It makes sense if you don't think about
it. Grow a second head. I would definitely wear it though. Having 6, if I could get them, would be. I would give up all my support minions for that.
I mean, it'd be fine as like a white body armor, right? It does nothing but make you grow a second head for a second helmet. Sure, that's enough of a trade-off.
I have to carefully not weigh in on pitches.
Yeah.
I
Suddenly
think
you
we
like
can
one and
assume
it doesn't show up. Someone will want to sacrifice you.
Yeah, let's. Here, I'll put myself forward. I don't think that's going to happen for a variety of reasons.
No.
It's the kind of thing
And
where
Octavian,
if I said that offhandedly in the office, I'd get a programmer looking at me angrily.
Mm-hmm.
Impression Mark has to do that a lot.
Oh yes.
Mark
Yeah, up until recently, he sat right behind me. He's moved to a different part of the office now, but a lot of the time I'd be, talking about a design idea with somebody, and then he'd just turn around and glower at me.
I'm imagining
I'm
it's
gonna have
something
to
along the
touch that
lines of
code at
like,
some point.
oh, it would be pretty easy to add another helmet, wouldn't it? And so the programmers who do that sort of thing are just like,
Oh no,
what?
I've
You
learned to never assume a thing is easy.
Oh yes.
Um,
This is what I was
especially
taught.
especially when
He-
that thing has to do with cooldowns. Do not assume it is easy.
Oh, oh yes.
Does
What
that
what I
mean
was
the
taught
20%
was any estimate that you give for how long something is going to take, if you're like, oh, I think this will take 5 hours to code, what you do is you double that, and then you increase the unit of measurement by 1. So 5 hours, you would double that to 10 hours, and then, it's 10 days, actually.
I was
Yeah.
hearing a story at ExileCon of apparently the designer towards the end of 319 walked up to Mark and was like, so it's fine to just invert all the stats on rings, right? Like that'll just work.
Mm.
And Mark
I was
was
a
not
QA
okay
at the
with
time. That was fun to test. There was a
Because
lot.
there are edge cases like flat damage to attacks. It's like, oh, instead of giving you negative damage to attacks, which can cause all sorts of problems, you say, oh, it does additional damage to you when something hits you. Like that's one of
Yeah.
those cases.
I mean, a lot of them we just had to be like, so what does inverting this even mean? And often those are the coolest designs where you come up with an idea that's like intuitively cool, and then you have to be like, okay, but what does it mean?
What does that do?
What are the implications of this?
Yep.
I can't imagine how many things would have broken in QA at the beginning of those inverted rings. Like, there's so because there were a few that like made it through, like the 0% projectile speeds or the reducing
Yeah.
curse AoE to 0 made blasphemy apply to you,
Which is technically
That
correct.
one's hilarious.
which
yes.
was I'm like, you know what? That makes sense. If you reduce my AoE all the way down to nothing, it's now just in me.
Is that
Probably not intended.
yeah? What? I just want to ask someone who knows how that even works on a technical level, because the way
You
that
may have the wrong
intuitively
guy.
I would. Sorry.
You may have the wrong guy.
Yeah, fair enough. But the way that I would intuitively program that, there is no way in a million years that I would have coded it in a way where that could happen. But that's probably just because I'm bad at programming and don't know how it should actually be implemented.
The best example is from chat, like Grant's aspect of the spider. What happens if you invert that? Like, what's the opposite of Grant aspect of the spider?
Honestly, I don't know what that does.
If something else gives you the aspect, it takes it away.
Loses
It prevents
aspect
you
of the
from getting
spider,
it.
yes.
Aspect of the spider is applied to you.
I don't
Yes.
know.
I don't-
There's clearly some handling for that, because that's a thing that could happen on live, right?
Like, it can happen. You can put spider on a ring. You can reflect it, so it must do something.
I don't know offhand.
I also don't know. You'd think I would know this.
I
I
can't
need to be right
immediately
back.
find it on the wiki, so it'll have to be a mystery until someone looks it up later.
Just 1 minute. I just gotta run to the restroom. I'll be right back.
All right. Someone on live with a reflecting mist. Go do that right now. Report back.
I seem to recall that it just can't be inverted. Yeah, and that's what
Yeah,
chat
people
is
saying
saying.
it just does nothing. Now, see, that's a good thing then. It's a very valuable mod to have on a ring that you're going to reflect.
True.
Yeah.
If I was doing it, I feel like I would have just made it so that it just changes into one of the other aspects. Like it just inverts into a different aspect.
I would
That's
have
the
made it
intuitive case to me.
I would have made it apply aspect of spider to you.
Yeah, I
True.
like my idea better of it gives you a negative one, so you have to get
Yeah.
aspect of the spider twice on the rest of your gear.
Your first added aspect is ignored.
How does it decide between the two?
Hello.
Welcome
Sorry
back.
about that.
We
So-
found out, by the way. It just gives you
Yeah,
aspect of the spider on both copies. It doesn't invert that mod.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Which
Because
explains
there are
not
some
enough to
that
think of what the opposite would be. So that makes
inverting it
sense.
wouldn't make sense at all, so you just don't do anything.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
Path of Exile has a lot of legacy content in the game. Going back leagues and leagues and leagues and years and years and years, even before leagues were a thing. That's still in the game. Is there anything that you've been, as a designer, wanting to like play with, change, update, and you personally or someone else in the office has just said, no, don't touch that. That's sacred. We can't do that.
I'm sorry to have a disappointing answer here, but no, that hasn't really come up. I
Oh.
wouldn't say that there's anything in the game that's like inherently sacred. There are things that we consider to be highly important, and by we I mean like the people who make these sorts of decisions at the director level. But pretty much anything is up for change if there was a good enough reason to change it. It's just sometimes that good enough reason has to be really, really good. But that can happen.
I had a
As
very
far
similar
as
question,
yeah, what's up?
which is, is there any code that's so old that no one wants to touch it because it's scary?
Making bestiary scarabs was not fun.
Mm.
I mean, it was fun designing them. And same with bestiary atlas passes that changed. Bestiary is things break in the weirdest ways. Where like just checking the box for the monster variety for so what's the name of the one, the unique bestiary beast that is like used in tandem to make empowered versions of crafts. What
The
did we end
Black
up naming that
Morrigan?
one? Black
Yeah.
Morrigan, yes. So Black Morrigan caused me endless headaches because it took me a very long time to figure out that checking the box to make him a unique monster, not in any bestiary related data or anything, in the like basic monster data, essentially, was causing bestiary to throw multiple fits. It was like, we can't spawn a unique monster; it has to be a rare. Even though some of the bestiary bosses are unique monsters, it's again, it's pain. But Black Morrigan's kind of cool, so I guess it was worth it in the end.
Einhar just wants to do Einhar things, yeah.
Yeah, leave the Einhar business to Einhar.
The other thing that is maybe more fundamental, that I personally still get frustrated by all the time, is the data where we set up a lot of the buffs. And by buffs, I don't mean just things that players would see as buffs. So, like a buff in the player in the dialect that's used commonly by a player is something that is like a bonus that's on you, temporary or permanent or whatever, like haste or whatever. But as far as the game is concerned, buff is a global term for anything that can affect you, permanent or over a duration. So like if you're intimidated, that's a buff as far as the internals are concerned. Again, not for things that care about buff duration, not for things that care about buff effect. Those are specific buffs that are categorized as buffs. So there's buffs that are buffs and there's buffs that aren't buffs. You can see why it starts to get confusing.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a whole ton of things that you have to get exactly right, or else it's not going. Like just getting a buff to appear like on your buff bar and show the correct value with the correct art and the correct description seems like a trivial thing, and it is not. It is a trivial thing if you're Mark 1 and you understand all the complexities inherently, but I am not. I am stupid man who does not understand all the complexities inherently.
That is not something I would have picked as difficult to do.
There's also like a lot of the small subtle things in the game have complexities that are there for very good reason. Like I'm not saying these are jank spaghetti systems. They're there for good reason, but they're not easy to understand unless you've worked in those systems for a long time. Like every checkbox that can be applied to a buff is there because we needed it at some point. Like it's all there for a reason. But the system, it's a computer. You tell a computer. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the old year one programming demonstration that professor. I've seen a video of a professor doing it, where the professor asks the class like, "All right, tell me how to make a peanut butter sandwich," and he has peanut butter and he has bread and he has a knife.
Yep.
And the class is like, well, put the peanut butter on the bread, and then he just takes the jar of peanut butter and slams it onto the bread. It's like that's what a computer does. It's very good at following instructions. You just have to be good at giving it instructions.
Following the exact instructions without
yes, very exacting.
at all.
we got down to like convert the ADB into ATP in your cells in order to be able to move your leg.
I was half expecting there to be like the whole picture of a coconut thing somewhere.
That I think
Yeah,
that
is
was
there a
debunked at
TF2
one
coconut?
point for the TF2 coconut, but yeah, I know what you're referring to.
Yeah.
The other thing is, and this is an even more broad level, but just like accurately displaying values in descriptions of stats is something the game does very, very well, but is something that is not intuitive to set up when you're the one who's putting it together. Because so I can't say we have a sword that, like the Ichimoji you have on screen right now, has 10% increased effective buffs on. So I don't just write that line and then slap it onto the sword, because what if at some point in the future we want to change that value to 12%? Or we have that same stat and we want to reuse it somewhere else at a different value. Well, I need to be able to write a description that's going to be able to take in whatever the current value is and then display that. And sometimes, depending on the value that it's taking in, the description needs to be different, right? Like if something says fires 1 projectile or fires 2 projectiles, you need it to say projectiles in the multiple case and projectile in the single case. So now you suddenly need a system that's able to robustly deal with looking at the value that it's taking in and displaying a different description depending on the value. And it balloons from there.
What you're saying is, for some weird reason, implementing an item into the game is vastly more complex than me just typing it out into POB.
Yes, because when you're just typing it out into POB, you care only about that case. But
Yeah.
when you're trying to implement a new thing into the game, it needs to be able to handle, any case that the user can throw at it, which gets
Right.
complex fast.
Oh.
So
It's just
Speaking of speaking of code that like there's a reason for it to exist that way. It's not confusing for the sake of being confusing. Like it works, but how are the comments?
So I work mostly in the data that is sort of like layered on top of the actual game code. So the game code is essentially a series of instructions for the game, and this is very broad. A series of instructions for the game and what to do with the data that's provided, and then I work in the data that's provided. So like the numbers and stats and where they go and what modifier goes on what thing and all that sort of thing. So I actually don't work directly in the code all that much. Very rarely do I, and usually only for very simple changes that I can't fuck something up horribly by doing, because that is not my domain. But I do sometimes see comments like, we need, some comment like, this is a horrible hacky fix, we need to do last minute, fix this later, and it's like 2 years old or something. But yeah, there's some angst and frustration in there.
It's back to that any temporary solution.
Oh yes.
Any temporary solution becomes a permanent one. It's horrible. Oh, it occurred to me what you were just describing about buffs having like everything counting as a buff and then having buff categories within the buff.
Sure.
That's exactly what broke the Herald build in Harvest League.
I'm not familiar with that specific thing.
It was counting
delirium.
It was counting delirium things and delirium orbs, and the slowdown graspy hands and those things were all getting stacked by aura buffs that the Herald was using, and it would have been that.
It just probably was
a complete halt.
Yeah, it probably was just somebody, mistakenly checking a box that shouldn't have been checked for that particular debuff.
So that actually touches on something that I was interested in, is like, there are stats in the game that very clearly there's been a lot of care put in that we can only ever have a very specific amount of that stat. The reason I put Ichimonji on the screen is there is no source of increased effective buffs on you in the game but specifically Ichimonji. And I am sure that as every single time that is completely generic, I should say.
There was one time where Mantra of Flames was really, really good, and so Ichimonji became best in slot.
Yeah. The other one, like, I'm sure every single person at GGG needs to quickly do a little counting every single time you introduce more reduced flash charges used. Like, you got to make sure we can't hit 0 because then everything breaks. Like, do you like have a specific process for managing that? Is there any particular stats that you personally are scared of? Or is it just based on like we generally know what can be a problem, and so we make sure that those things are avoided?
I mean, it's partially that last bit. There are people who are relatively senior at the company, which, again, does not include me. I've only been here for about 3 years now. Who and Mark One is probably a good example of this. Who one of his roles at the company is saying, "No, we tried that 4 years ago, and it was horrible. We shouldn't do that again. Like we shouldn't use that stat unless it's being very, very controlled." So and you need that. You need that sort of collective memory. But then to one of the other questions you asked there, a stat that I'm personally afraid of is more of a PoE2 one. We currently don't have a cap for normal monsters in PoE2 on how much you're able to slow them, like no hard cap. So a few times now I've had to nix ideas that we otherwise thought were cool because they brought us to that cap again. And you could have been able to make a build that completely slows everything to being unable to move. Well, everything that's a normal monster at least. So yeah, I mean, it comes up a lot. There's also sometimes you'll have like I think there's a quality stat on what was it? It was on one of the totems. I think the totem skill, it has like a base attack time, and the quality stat was reducing that base attack time. And we had to nix that because if you stack too much quality, you could get it to the point where the base attack time was 0. And that breaks things. It breaks things a lot.
Infinite damage.
Infinite number of hits in one.
Well, the game.
What
Like,
Technically not. It's 33.5 or something per second. Number of skill activations per second.
You don't get infinity DPS because you get game crashing instead of infinity DPS.
Infinite
the other time
in
where
the
this
game.
the other time where this happened was internally. One of the very first iterations of Tempest Bell could ring other Tempest Bells, and then you just put 2 Tempest Bells next to each other, and the game crashed because they each ring each other in the same tick.
So I was mistaken earlier today. There's a rune graft that is 20% chance for the skill to not go on cooldown. So I was thinking with automation support and that you could theoretically hit the 20% chance 100 times in a row, and it would cast it 100 times in one instant. But
it
apparently
would only
not.
activate once per server tick, because you can only have one skill activation each server tick.
Believe that's correct, but it's a bit outside my expertise.
I also think that's correct because I deal with server ticks a lot.
Yeah, it sounds right intuitively, because otherwise I probably would have crashed the game earlier.
I have made a number of builds that use the skill Frenzy that stacks so much attack speed that I have blasted past that cap. And so I have to put on Barrage, because Barrage is one skill activation but fires multiple projectiles that can all hit the same enemy. And you can kind of get past the cap that way. But Barrage slows down your attack speed for each projectile, so you can use Barrage with a whole bunch of projectiles to slow down your attack time so that you get more hits within each server tick because you're capped by the server tick.
See, this is where I feel disconnected somewhat from the player base, because this is my bullshit. I get to like 5 million DPS and I'm like, yeah, cool. This is good.
Yeah, that's a good number.
Yep.
I get to the end of the league and I've got to spend this currency on something. Like,
I just let it go to standard.
Yeah,
I burn it. I would like divine venters or something.
Like the Holy Relic build I've been playing for like several leagues now. I keep pulling damage out of it because I find a way to ignore another map mod entirely, and I'm like, I would lose 900,000 DPS. But I could ignore another map mod. Yes, let's do that. Yes, let's do that. I just keep pulling damage. Now it's got like 6-7 million or something. I can do tier 17 maps. It's fine.
Yeah.
It got smoother and smoother. I keep pulling damage out of it. Keep making the build feel better.
This is a very personal gripe, but I have some people in my community, and I see some things on Reddit sometimes where people are talking and comparing builds, and then I'll occasionally see the line come up of, well, I would play that build, but it's a dot, so it can only hit dot cap. And it's like, man, what do you need more than 32 million or whatever DPS for? Like,
yeah.
I guess if you're doing 100% delirium, super giga juiced rogue exile farming or
Mm.
something like that, like there are probably situations.
Well,
there
It's
are
actually
probably
fine in that
situations,
case
but-
because those rogue exiles are only as tanky as they are because they've got a bunch of damage reduction, and dot cap occurs after damage reduction
end.
anyway.
Yeah.
So those people are complaining for no reason.
I don't mean to like come off as
But-
attacking someone or something.
So,
I'm more trying to illustrate that I feel a disconnect between myself and some players because I look at 5 to 10 million DPS and I'm like, damn, that hits hard.
I am actually in the situation where I'm at dot cap and also feel I don't have enough damage, but that's because I'm only at dot cap when I have 20 golems all wailing on the same guy. And that is
Ah.
not occurring on a regular basis.
Yeah, fair.
Theoretical dot cap.
Yeah. So ideally I want each individual golem to do dot cap, and that would solve all my problems. But that might be a bit much.
I wish you the best of luck.
That seems excessive. That seems very excessive. I'm up to 10 mil now, and I'm blasting every piece of content in existence.
You
I don't.
have a lot better screen projection than I do.
My DPS is impossible to calculate.
That's always
It's
good.
a number.
It's certainly a number.
Yeah, I mean, that's
2 DPS.
it's one of the things that was a pet peeve for me whenever I was a streamer as well, was people would always want these really specific numbers, and I sort of get it because they like, you know, from the person who's watching your streams perspective, if there's somebody who's just stopped by for like an hour or whatever and is interested in your build, they're trying to get a feel for whether or not they should invest 8 hours in leveling this character, you know, and a bunch of divines in building it. And so they want some objective thing to judge that by. But me personally, I just go on vibes, man. It's like I put this into path building and like threw one of the items on and planned out a tree to see whether it like looked okay, and then if it passed the vibe check, then I level it. I have no idea what the maximum theoretical damage is, or how strong it currently is, or what the optimal choice is. I'm just playing.
I just always tell them no, and then they build it anyway.
Fair enough.
I have a very
You
bad
warned them.
that my stream hates when I make new builds, which is if I come up with an idea, I'll like open path of building and I'll like what I call sketch an outline of my tree. And then I'll be like, yeah, I think that looks all right. And I'll just start leveling the character. And I'm like, I haven't plugged in the skills. I've just got the idea in my head and like a rough outline of the tree. I'll just go.
Yeah,
And we'll work it out when we get there. Like,
I did the exact same thing a couple days ago on stream where I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I can fit Melding of the Flesh into this build. And so I just did and respec'd half my character and changed a bunch of gear to fit Melding of the Flesh to get 90 all res. And then it was like, oh yeah, right, minus 75% all res is a thing I have to do something about. So I then ended up having to spend like another 10 divines on, I have like a 250 resistance ring because I had nowhere else to get resistances. So I've got some crazy Calandra ring. Speaking of the game absolutely breaking because of power creep and getting stronger and stronger over time and hitting theoretical programming limits.
Sure.
I can't remember how long ago this was, and I'm definitely going to paraphrase him a lot. But in an interview a while ago, Mark II said, or Mark Roberts said, well, after 5 years of power creep, things are going to change. It might be more in X direction. As a designer who works on PoE 2, is that something you're worried about? Do you think you're going to try and be more careful about power creep in PoE 2 than you were in PoE 1? Is that something you just view as like the natural progression of a live service game as it continues on? Or is that, like, do you view what happened with power creep in PoE 1 as a mistake?
I can't really speak to like the 5-year broad plan regarding anything on either game again, that's a decision that is over my head. I do, however, firmly believe that simply by the act of adding more options for players, which we will do because that's where part of the fun comes from, is having new toys to play with and new stuff to do. You know, like that's what gets me excited to play. Even if You're in some mystical fairyland where everything can be perfectly balanced with everything else, which would be incredibly boring, in my opinion. But even if you were in that mystical fairyland, you would still have power creep because when players have more distinct options at their disposal, even if every individual option, when measured against another, is somehow considered equally balanced, you now have more choices. You can make more builds, which means you have more options to take on content. So you have more potential solutions to the problems the game has in front of you. And like again, that's a mystical fairyland. So like yeah, like in answer to the broad question, will there be power creep? Of course, in both games, always and forever. But like, will we try? It's not something we have to try to do. It'll happen. What I try to do, at least, I shouldn't say we because I don't speak for the company, but what I try to do is focus more on making changes that lead to interesting, compelling content, whatever that might mean, rather than worrying too much about, if we're within the ethos of the, exact right balance and stuff. And like balance is important. I don't mean to completely downplay that, but it should be that you design something cool and then you determine a way to make it balanced rather than you design something balanced and determine a way to make it cool. At least that's how I prefer to go about things.
Now that we're on PoE 2, I'm wondering how many times stuff comes up that you get like big complaints about or become hard points in PoE 2 right now that you already know are fixed because you're like, these problems they're having are tools that we don't have yet, that are sitting back here that I know about, but you don't have yet. And you're just not able to fix things because there's just more stuff coming. The new classes, the new weapon types, more supports, all of those sort of things that you know about already. And just like, this fixes these problems people are complaining about, but they're not ready.
I mean, I run into that feeling across both games on larger and smaller timescales where like, yeah, definitely there's part of, potentially PoE2 not having quite as much build variety is as something like PoE1 is just, it doesn't have as many ascendancies and it doesn't have as many skills and it doesn't have it has more supports due to the way the support system is functionally different, but still it doesn't have as much stuff. And even outside of that, there's a lot of other character impacting balance, like character impacting systems that aren't like, passive tree and skills. There's weird uniques that you can build around, and we need more of those. And that I feel like we made really good strides on that particular front. PoE2. Some of the uniques that were introduced in 021, 022, what was, I don't remember the patch denomination or whatever, but some of the most recent uniques were pretty damn cool. And I did not work on those, by the way. I'm not just tooting my own horn here. That was a relatively newer designer that we brought in who's been working on the unique items in both games, and he's doing a very good job. And yeah, it just needs some iteration, man. That's obviously not all it needs. I don't mean to simply imply that. There's a lot of work to be done in a lot of different places, but that is a huge portion of it. There just needs more iteration, more stuff.
Yeah, it felt like to me that was going to be like a relatively common thing. People complaining about stuff that's already kind of fixed. It's just down the road there, and I can't give it to you right now.
Yeah, and I can't be specific because it's down the road. I'm sorry.
Like, this hasn't even been announced. It's not ready. I can't put it in. We can't do anything with it, but we know it's down there. It's fixed.
The one thing, like I've been going on about how I can't promise changes and whatever, but the one thing I can absolutely definitely promise is there's a lot of stuff being worked on for both games, to be honest. Like we do not have a problem with coming up with cool stuff. We have a problem with cutting the cool stuff that we can't get in time for a release.
Yep.
So, for skill balance that we've been talking about a bit in PoE2, it seems like in PoE2 quite a bit of the power has been pulled out of the support gems and has been put into the base skills themselves. The base skills seem to have a bit more going on with them than in PoE1. Is that, like, was there a specific decision made, hey, support gems need to be weaker, so the baseline skill needs to have more going on? Or is that, do you foresee that there would be design problems if you decided to say, halve the baseline power of every skill and then double the power of every single support gem. Like, just because there seems to be such a juxtaposition between the power of supports in PoE 1 versus PoE 2.
I'd never actually considered it in that specific angle. It's an interesting way to look at it. Which probably gives you some information on the intentionality of things, at least from my specific point of view. Which, yes, I did work on supports for PoE2 quite a bit recently. Supports went through a lot of different phases for PoE2. Like there was an initial version that was available at some Exile cons, which is why I can probably talk about it, where like support gems were not really a significant source of damage outside of a few very specific exceptions, because we wanted to make it so that support gems could be more utilized for utility things or behavioral changes on skills. And like that was a good design goal to have, I think. But part of the problem is that you need extra sockets and you need more links to feel punchy and impactful. And if they don't grant damage, then they simply aren't going to feel that punchy or impactful unless the non-damage thing that they're giving you is some really cool, skill defining behavior, like adding 5 extra projectiles or causing it to chain 3 times or something. And there's only so many cool skill defining behaviors you can do.
Give us 5 different copies of GMP. We'll make 20 projectiles work. It's fine.
I mean, there are some new supports that were added recently that I personally feel really proud of, that I think are cool build defining changes, but a lot of them are also ones that players don't really use that much. Like I don't think alignment or spectral volley are used all that much, but there's some of the ones that I think, like if I look at the PoE2 supports that I had a hand in, those are the ones that I think are the coolest.
Funnily enough, I wonder if I'd get a lot of pushback on this. I actually kind of feel the opposite about that. Like I feel like PoE2's support gems, if anything, add too much damage. I liked it leaning into utility a lot more. That first idea of like, yeah, these will change the behavior. So some things like, faster attacks or LMP, you will get damage by nature of we changed how the skill works, but without coming with a more damage multiplier. I don't know. I just like more damage multipliers just seems so boring to me. Within PoE2, it's just like, oh, well, that one's 35% more damage, so it just goes on. It doesn't do anything.
I can see where you're coming from, and to some degree agree with it, but like,
Can't rule it out entirely.
There's also going to be support designs that you make, like you said, like LMP or whatever, like extra projectiles, that just are more damage inherently.
Yeah.
And then what you have to do with those, if we don't want support gems to be a significant source of damage, is to then apply a penalty to them, which some of them already have, but like an even more severe one. And the more you do that, the worse and worse it feels to actually use it.
Oh, I hate the LMP penalty. It's the worst.
Even if on paper, over, like it works out to being a damage bonus, it works out to being a damage multiplier. Like it doesn't feel good to be penalized, right? Like people have, and this is just a fundamental aspect of human nature that basically no one is immune from. People feel negatives much more than they feel positives.
Yeah. The other issue is that, like,
go ahead.
Like certain skills get a hell of a lot more out of multiple projectiles than others, right? If you
sure.
like balance every single skill around PoE1 tornado shot getting extra projectiles, then anything that is not tornado shot getting extra projectiles feels like absolute garbage because it's not just a strict multiplier.
And you can't just say like, oh well, we won't design skills like that, because that locks out so many interesting skill designs.
So I guess you have effectiveness of added damage. You could have effectiveness of added projectiles on skills as well.
But that gets so in the weeds, and like, PoE does not have the best reputation as being easy to approach. Like if you had to explain the game to your friend who's never played an ARPG before, are you going to want to try and explain what effectiveness of added projectiles means? Like,
yeah, and PoE2 is doing such a better job of like onboarding a new player without confusing them. We definitely don't want to add more confusing things that aren't needed.
I mean, this is effectively
why it's important to have like so many, like we're talking about just more and more new options that are added to the game. It's like, okay, well, GMP is really, really good with Tornado Shot, but not particularly good with these other projectile skills. Well, maybe we come out with a new support gem that's good for those skills, but not for Tornado Shot, Like, over time, there's going to be more options.
I mean,
And yeah,
that's
you have
part of the process of support and skill design is trying to locate gaps and come up with interesting things to fill those gaps.
you have like
Yeah.
two. You could have like two different GMPs. You have like shotgun support, and you have multiple projectile support. And shotgun support says, "Hey, projectiles can shotgun," and multiple projectiles says they can't. I guess.
I mean, you don't need to look any further than the existence of greater multiple projectiles and volley in PoE1. See that that is the thing that has happened. Yes. Like,
Sure.
what if we took GMP, changed it in some way, and now it functions differently and is better for some skills over others.
And I have done that before. I have swapped and been like, oh, I'm using GMP and I should be using volley. This is actually better.
Yeah,
Like,
on
oh,
my
here we
current build,
go.
I'm using volley because it has a smaller damage penalty than GMP, and my projectiles go in random directions anyway.
Sure.
Yeah, those frenzy builds I was mentioning earlier usually use both because you have all of the damage anyways. You just want more proj. Because then you get more skill activations per server tick.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's the difficult part of the job is coming up with new interesting ways to effectively abstract away twists on getting more damage or getting more defense or getting more speed. Like if you boil things in the video game down to their fundamentals, that's what you get. You get damage, you get speed, you get defense. There's a lot of complexity within those, but if you boil it down, then that's what it becomes, right?
Whole point of design is making it feel interesting within that.
Yeah, trick the monkey brain into thinking that the pixels mean something.
Pixels
I
mean
hate when I
everything.
remember that. I'm just turning
The
lights
pixels
on
are
and off
so
on my monitor.
important.
It feels.
How are we on time and the amount of questions that we want?
Well, ostensibly, we're running for another 19 minutes to hit the 2-hour mark. At any point, someone can say, "Hey, we're done," and we'll be done, I guess. But we've still got time for a good few more questions. Yeah.
Do we want more informational questions, or do we want to throw in some silly ones?
I'm good either way.
Yeah, let's do some silly ones.
Here, I'll do some silly ones, and you cook the serious ones. I've got what is your favorite character name that you've ever seen, like on another player?
Oh man, I wish I had a good prepared answer to this. I have to like sit here and delve
I
through the old
figured.
memory bank to find one.
While you're thinking, I love some of the randomly generated names of mercenaries this league. Like in level 20s, I found a mercenary named Hoko Hongo, and he was so incredibly good for his level that I used him for the next 20 levels, and we started having lore about Hoko Hongo.
Excellent.
Okay, but there are mercs named Baylor that use Holy Relics.
Yes. I'm currently using
is
a
the
merc
best.
named Baylor the Righteous.
Yeah, that is the absolute best because that is like my build.
The mercenaries. So the audio and narrative teams work really closely because the audio team does a lot of the voice recordings, the narrative team does the writing. Naturally. And the mercenaries that have like nonsense voice lines, the ones that just go like "Gumiga babaku," and stuff like that. Most of those prefixes, like the first names, are names named after the audio team. It's great.
That's great info.
Yeah,
I'll consider that my question answered.
I found some mercenary in like the really early acts called like Miz the Dim-Witted, and every single one of his support gems made all of his skills actively worse. I don't know if that was intentional or if that was just
okay. So I've seen this posted a number of times on Reddit and stuff where like this mercenary is so dumb. Why is he using brutality and added coals on the same links or something? And like, yeah, it's purposeful that those are both viable options that could roll for that support. Some of the mercenaries aren't very good at making builds.
Yep. Some of them are brand new players. They've just thrown gems in that dropped on the floor.
It's like players who use Azuri's Promise with Avatar of Fire.
Yep.
It's just a
There's
rite of
always one.
passage. Yeah.
It was about the only thing that upset me about mercenaries was that I found the mercenary with my name and I was like, oh man, I would have spent so long voicing that character. I would have sent in so many clips. Just the one with my name. Let me voice it. That would have been great.
I think that there's no oct, but I think there's an octor as a potential prefix, which I did not ask for. It just was on the list. I think incidentally as well, because I think the guy who was writing the names had not actually really met me. So it was just a happy accident.
So you guys get feedback from a lot of different sources. You've got like your internal peer review, then you've got the screaming, mewling children on Reddit, Discord, and the rest of the community. I include myself in that, by the way. I am a screaming, mewling child when it comes to feedback to this game. Like, when you're designing things, how much are you considering like each different source of feedback? Like, are you like regularly referring back to sources like Reddit and Discord as well as internal peer review, or is it mostly just like you're designing internally and what is being said outside is not really a concern of yours?
Me personally, I generally try to first get through like the initial iteration on something before I would, look for anything outside. That feels so obvious and straightforward to say, but like, get an idea on paper, and by on paper I mean like, I guess not get an idea in the game at the very base level using like, placeholder visuals and all that sort of stuff. And then definitely, absolutely at that point, get it in front of as many other people as I can who I guess are within the company, because it's still not something that's public, so I can't just throw that to my friend who happens to play the game. Because yeah, like there have been a lot of times where I've come up with a skill design and I'm like, this is really cool, we should do this, and then I put it in the game, and then somebody in QA plays it and they're like, this feels awful when I use it in X situation. I'm like, oh right, yeah, that situation does exist in the video game, doesn't it? Because it's very easy to like narrow in on thinking this would be so cool when used in this way, and then you just don't necessarily think about the other things that players, a holistic experience of the game doesn't just get to do the cool thing and nothing else. They have to also maybe butt up against the frustrations that the skill would have in other certain contexts. I worry I didn't answer the question super well, though. I kind of went off on a tangent.
You pretty much answered. Like, I guess when you're talking about the context of things that already exist in the game, if you're doing like balancing or changes later on, like at that point, are you referring primarily to community feedback, or is that still just internal, like you've seen it in the release date and decided that you personally don't like it? Well, not you personally, the company.
Community feedback definitely matters. I would say the places where it's like holds the most weight are generally on more systemic things, where like, if players as a whole are saying we don't really like this mechanic, or we don't really like, like the league mechanic has X problem, like mercenaries being too rippy, for instance, which is arguably still the case. I'm not here to draw lines in the sand one way or the other, but that feedback was very valuable in then adjusting like 25 mercenary skills or whatever got adjusted in the most recent patch. Like that is the kind of thing where player feedback is most valuable, is those things where it's like affecting everyone and it's on the aggregate. Where it's harder to actually get useful information because bias comes into it a lot more is feedback on like a particular skill or a particular unique or something, because everybody's going to have their own perspective, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just makes it much harder to get a clear idea of, okay, what's actually wrong here and what needs.
Yeah.
All right, I've got another silly question if you're ready for
Sure.
that. Sometimes content that might have been patched remains in the game specifically because it's funny. For example, when they did a pass on the rare monster name generation, they kept in Stink Stink because it's very funny.
Correct.
Is there anything you know of that was left in the game in a different state than it was intended because people liked it better that way?
It's less funny and more cool, but like a very recent example would be Spectral Shield Throw of Trarthus. I had kind of forgotten when I was designing it that split takes precedence over pierce in the projectile behavior order, and that you can just use Sniper's Mark to split it into multiple UFO hovering shields. And somebody in QA was like, this will do this. Is this fine? It's like, oh yeah, it's cool. Sure. And that happens quite a lot where, the game is extremely complex, and very often you'll put something in without being able to fully consider every single ramification of it. One thing that actually sadly had to get taken out, but was very funny, and I kind of wish we had kept in the game, is in Pee-wee 2, there's a kind of monster in the Vistiri Desert, I think is what the name of the area in Act 2. It might be some other name. That was the internal name at one point. The Act 2 area, that's like desert with tons of giants, Titan Grotto, that's what it is. There's a guy there that like summons sand golems and flings tornadoes around and stuff. And if you had him as a specter, the specter effect would apply to his tornadoes. So they would just be these giant pillars of blue, basically, that were moving around the screen, completely blocking your camera. I wish we had kept it, but I see why we didn't.
That's right up my alley.
Have zero visibility. That's how it works. That's what we want.
My build, you can't see anything because of the microtransactions I have on, and I tried turning them off, and chat's like, no, put them back.
No, we can see the floor. How dare you?
Your chat just has a really deep-seated fear of the floor.
Yes, that's canon now.
Deep-seated hatred of the bitrate.
Oh god,
that too.
I'm so very far the opposite. If they gave me a particle slider, it would be down on 10 or 20% the whole time. It's never happening. They already said no. But I would have it down. I'd be able to see the floor all the time.
We do get dynamic culling, which I think is very useful because it still does not stop me because my stuff is so excessive, but it at least makes the game run a lot smoother when I'm doing my thing.
Yeah, it's a lot of work goes into that with the VFX artists and the engine team, so I'm glad it's getting use. Semi-related. It's not left in the game, but probably my favorite bug that I've ever found when I was working in QA was for a number of leagues after I joined, for like months, probably 6 months after I joined. I would every few weeks get a report from the in game. You can type /bug and then a short description, and it'll send us a bug report in case you weren't aware of that.
Yep.
We would get a report through that pretty regularly, like once a week, but not all the time. So not to the point where it was like super easy to reproduce and happening to everyone. That the delve node, the one where you have to kill like a bunch of essence monsters and then you get the essence fossil that drops from the pillar in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
I forget the name of the faceted. No, not faceted. Whatever. The essence fossil that drops from the pillar in the middle. That wasn't dropping. Like people would kill all the essence monsters and then it just wouldn't show up. And I eventually realized that every single time it was because Essence of Envy was there. And Essence of Envy has this ability that's pulled from the Dominus fight, but reskinned, where a big hand comes up and grabs you and pulls you to the Essence monster. That was just checking if the thing it was affecting was on not its own team. It wasn't looking specifically for the player team. It was looking for not its own team. So it would grab the pillar in the middle of the event and move it. And that pillar, the way that it drops its fossil was when the event ended, it would check at the location where the pillar spawns and to drop a fossil there if you open the pit, like when you click the pillar. And since the pillar had moved, it was no longer in the spot where it could drop the fossil anymore, so it just wouldn't.
That's great.
And that took me
incredible.
Like weeks of reports coming in every now and then to figure it out. It's very annoying.
I have so much sympathy for that because the other day I reported a bug on stream that actually just was not a bug and it was just me doing something wrong. And I feel like maybe 50% of my bug reports are like that. So I feel extra bad.
This doesn't happen to me. Is it intended that sometimes the lost shipments that you get from the new lost shipments node just have nothing in them?
No, that's not intended.
Okay.
I've been looking into why that
Singular
happens.
like barrels of them have nothing in them, but like
Yes,
the
that-
overall thing always has something.
Yeah,
No,
it should have some loot. A barrel being empty, that is somewhat correct, but like nothing at all, that's not correct.
I have on 3 separate occasions now clicked on all of the barrels, pressed Alt, like turned off the loot filter, and there's still nothing on the ground.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's causing that, but I was going to look into that next week.
Good to know.
Oh, all right, you might not be able to answer this. This was not on our list, and it's a technical question about what's going on right now in PoE1. If you don't know, it's fine. But we've been theorizing about getting Starfall craters from ores. And everybody's been wondering if they're actually tied to Verisium ore or just any ore spawn. Do you happen to know?
I do not know offhand, sorry.
Damn. Nobody can quite figure it out. We know we need ores. We don't know if we need Verisium or not.
Well, I'll just have to keep doing science, I suppose.
I think it's going to take like weeks to figure out, but we will figure it out.
We'll fill some spreadsheets, figure it out.
Yep.
I have a technical question. This is just to get like a broad overview of how much work it does, or how much work it takes to do something. So like, for example, let's say that there's like a really urgent hotfix that like something isn't working on live and we need to hotfix it right now. And it's the easiest change ever. It's like ticking a box or something. Like, how long does it take for you ticked the box? Now, how long does it take for that to go live? Like, what process does it go through?
It depends on where that box is. If that box is in some of the data that both the server and the client need, and definitely need to be in sync on, and like the client can't be displaying the wrong thing or there's a big bad problem, then that's going to need a restart, which is much more significant. If it's something that can be done only server side, or sometimes only client side, depending on the change, then that could be deployed. If it's check a box and we have everybody who's relevant is in and able to work on it at that very moment, it could be deployed in like 20 minutes to 40 minutes, something like that.
Yeah, but that assumes that you have someone like it has to go through some sort of approval.
Yeah, I mean, it also depends on the level of testing that's required. Like if it's something where there's a monster that, just as a random example, this is not related to any actual change that I've been a part of, but if there's a monster that is meant to say delete itself on death and it's not deleting itself on death, just as an example, that could just be as like the testing for that is spawn in the monster, see if it deletes itself on death, then maybe spawn in the monster in some other weird circumstances, see if it's still correctly doing that, spawn it in party play, spawn it in with some random modifiers on it that behave with on death effects. That could probably take maybe 20 to 30 minutes to test all those edge cases, and then you can push it to live pretty quick from there. But
Right.
if it's like
Pretty
a more
solid
systemic
answer.
thing where it's affecting like 50 monsters, then yeah, that's going to take a lot more testing.
That's still pretty quick. Like as long as it's something that is super easy to actually fix. Just pushing it live seems very quick.
Yeah, though you'd be surprised at the things that are like, like sometimes it can be that checking a box is, again, in some aspect of the game data that both the server and client need to be in sync on, and then it gets a lot more complicated.
Oh yeah, we're not here to talk about networking issues. That's a can of worms.
Yeah, and one that I'm not really qualified to talk on, regardless. So
It scares me as a software engineer.
it should.
When you've added new stuff to the game in the past, has any particular piece of feedback ever taken you like completely by surprise? Like, obviously, probably not the case here, but like, were you shocked that mercenaries were too rippy to people, and you were like, "Oh damn, we need to nerf that"?
That particular one, not so much. I mean, there were going to be mercenaries is an interesting one in terms of balance, because a lot of their damage is extremely highly variable depending on the gear they have equipped, particularly attack mercenaries. So, for instance, like some of the basically any that are using attack skills, they're not getting most monsters draw their very, very, very basic stats, like things for damage from a single table, and they multiply it in various ways. I won't go into the details, but most monsters share some fundamental stats, basically that scale of level. And mercenaries actually don't share a lot of those stats, and instead will get a lot of the equivalent stats that they would have otherwise gotten in that way from their gear, or from their gear and then multiplied by some amount to make it more appropriate. And because if they just had player life is the big example there. If they just had player life in the end game, they would have 8,000 life. Like they can't have player life when they're on the enemy team, because 8,000 is not a very big number compared to player damage.
You would need to turn on like PvP scaling, and then that's a whole other can of worms.
Yes. So that alone is going to mean that sometimes players are going to be murdered by a really, really, really rippy mercenary that just happens to roll with a, merciless roll on their weapon or something. No, I'm not saying that we got it exactly right, and we definitely didn't, because we patched and made some changes, and it may still be wrong. I'm more just saying that, like, no, I'm not surprised there are some cases of mercenaries being rippy. Changes or things that I put in the game that like player feedback has surprised me on. One of them was I got some feedback from someone who really didn't like the reward system for mercenaries. And this kind of, it was a viewpoint that I never would have considered, because it's just so far off from how I play the game, look at it, where they were frustrated that the mercenaries they were encountering had so much good gear that they wanted, and they couldn't take all of it. And they wanted the system to instead just randomly select an item for them, so that they didn't have the pressure of having to choose a thing.
Ooh.
And to me, having to choose between various things is really, really cool, and part of what makes the mercenary system, the rewards of it, compelling, because I'm weighing between different things. But for them, it was a source of FOMO.
I do have some friends that I'm like hand-holding through the game a little bit, and they have a fairly constant issue with choice paralysis. And
like, I'm not necessarily, I want to be clear, I'm not trying to like throw this person under the bus or anything. I'm not saying like they're wrong for thinking this way. It's more like I would never have considered that, because that's just not how I approach.
It's just not how you work.
Like, now that it's been said, like, I see how especially newer players could struggle with that. It could cost you a lot of time spending there. But like, for me, I loved it. I never would have thought that would be a feedback. That would never have occurred to me, because I can just mouse over all the gear, right? You just go, oh, hang on, that's really good, and that's really good. I'm gonna try that one, and then I'm done. But if you don't know, you could spend 10 minutes looking at every one.
Wait, you have one more somewhat important question regarding mercenaries. Do they scale how their accuracy rating works at all? Because I had a 95% evasion character fighting mercenaries. I do not think I was evading 95% of attacks. So I'm wondering if because monsters have like 300 accuracy rating, but players get thousands.
Well, I mean, they can get accuracy on gear.
Does that not scale at all? So they will just have many times the accuracy that a monster would have then?
They will have what the gear says they have in that regard, yes.
There's like crit multi-scales now, right?
I believe so, since the latest patch. I actually didn't do that series of changes, because I've switched to working. I'm doing some like bug fixes and stuff for PoE 1 and mercenaries, but I'm working a lot on PoE 2 at the moment. I jump back and forth between both games quite a lot, which I personally quite enjoy. I am someone who thrives on context switching like that. But yeah, so I mean, they'll have accuracy if they roll it on a ring or something like that. Also, I think there's a few skills they use that can't be evaded. Like one of them uses Vol Ground Slam, that can't be evaded built in.
My Baylor has Touch of God, and I feel like he doesn't use it. There might be a bug involved there, but like I took off his weapon and gave him a Doriani's Fist in the hope that it would scale the damage of Touch of God. And it turns out when the mercenary has no weapon, he just stands there, even when he has a bunch of skills that could use unarmed. And I was very disappointed.
I would have assumed that if he had a valid weapon, it would have, and assuming unarmed is valid, that it would have used it. I can look into that.
Yeah, wouldn't you give him Face Breakers? Because then he does 1,000% more Touch of God.
Yeah, if he uses
it. Very possibly.
Isn't it physical, or maybe?
Face Breakers is physical, yeah. but
Yeah.
I thought
You'd have
isn't
to give
touch
him
and
like
path
steel
Volatile?
ring. Yeah.
Anyways, yeah.
I haven't made this yet, but I really do need to say these mercenaries like are one of my favorite things. My favorite thing
Yeah.
I've seen so far. There's a guy who league started an Aurabot on his own. He's not a party. He's just been using mercs the whole time.
Yeah,
As
when
a
you're
regular
having
merc, just has him. He's doing tier 17 maps. Like he's
That
just
was
clearing full maps
in the
as Aurabot.
trailer.
It's that's just you could never do that before.
That's very cool.
please leave them in the
I-
game next patch. I want them forever. Do not take them away from me. I need them.
They give me so many build options that wouldn't have been possible before.
Yeah.
Like there you could put it on an animate guardian, right? But the mercenary is so much cooler than the animate guardian. You get so many more options.
It's
This
one of
is-
those things where I'm really glad you guys are enjoying it, because it's one of those things where I look at the system and all I can see are the like 5 lingering things that I would have done different or would have done better if I had more time.
You can
You know,
update
maybe
them.
if
That's
it-
fine. Just please don't
maybe
take
if it
them
goes
away
core.
from us.
That's again, whether or not a mechanic goes core is above my head.
Not on you.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's legitimately one of my favorite mechanics that have been added. I want them forever.
That's very good to hear.
I keep thinking about how to use different ones in different builds, and the only thing I want is more than 3 of them, because I've got like 7 build ideas, and I'm like,
Yeah.
but like to replace my current one, I can't replace him on the spot because he's with me, so I need to use a second spot to get a new one that's slightly better. And now I've only got 1 slot left to hold for old characters, which I haven't run yet.
I still have my level 27 Hoko Hongo because he's legendary.
That's not so much like
that slot's taken forever.
It's not so much like a limitation that's part of, like a balance consideration or something. It's more just mercenaries are very heavy on data storage. Like they have a lot of they have skills that can be different, they have supports that can be different, they have their name that can be different, they have the items you give them. So
I guess
like
if we do end up like expanding on it, then the easier way, rather than giving us access to infinite mercenary storage, would be eventually give us some limited amount of control over their skills, so that we don't have to store many mercenaries, so we can have multiple different loadouts that are appropriate for multiple different characters.
I could see that. I personally really like their skills and supports being randomized, because I like some aspect of them being something that comes prepackaged, so to speak. So you have like a mixture of your own control over it and then having to grind for the perfect one.
Yeah,
I like it random as well, because I've been like slowly upgrading the same kind of guy. You get one that's like Envy, it's great, and you get Envy and Despair, it's great. And now I'm still looking for one with Envy and Despair and Zealotry, and also like the increased effect of curses support on it. So like I get to keep grinding for it to be better.
I have done possibly 150 maps since the Envy change. I have seen 1 Cruel Mistress. I am tilted as hell.
Because of Hoko Hongo, I basically checked every single eruptor. Like I tried out every single possible combination permutation of eruptor, and I was pleasantly surprised multiple times. I was like, I thought that previous one was the best it was going to get. Now this one it randomly doesn't have volcanic fissure of snaking, and it only uses consecrated path and covering them in ash and stuff, and it actually is performing better for my current character, because it has like flame link, which I wouldn't have considered, but it turns out it gives me a lot of damage. So I do support the randomness.
There was a version of mercenaries where they didn't have tons of DR and instead just had way more life instead of the DR. So in case
Ziggy was talking about that in his reveal video.
In for those of you who don't know, and as we talked about in the most recent patches where we were adjusting it, mercenaries do have a hidden DR, because if they didn't, they would just fall over instantly, because they're not very smart and they walk into bearer bombs and whatever. So there was a version of mercenaries that never made it to release, but yeah, Ziggy did play internally, where they didn't have that DR and instead they just had really, really high life. There's a few problems with that. One of them is suddenly any unique that scales off life, like Burden of Truth, becomes insane, and you just can't allow it on mercenaries, and that kind of sucks. We don't want to just have an arbitrary list of things you can't put on your mercenary. The other issue is the Flame Link mercenary, because that scales off life, and suddenly he's giving you 40,000 flat damage or something, and it's like, no, can't do that.
Does it still scale with life? Because it seems like they're using weirdly slightly modified version of skill. Like the envy that they give us is not our envy.
Well, it
Like-
is. It's just it's your envy, but there's more levels that are available.
But
Yeah, 'cause
level
we get
1
level
envy and level
15
15
envy.
are envy are the same, so I figured that it was pretty hard coded.
That's
So then level 25
probably-
envy is different, and then they have higher than level 25 envy?
So mercenaries use higher level skills the higher level the mercenary is, and
Yep.
that scales up to a number that I don't think we've said publicly, but
Yeah, fair
it's
enough.
probably on PoEDB somewhere.
It's weirdly not, or at least it's hard to find.
I believe it's a level 28 envy.
Okay.
They do
So
use
does that-
quite powerful auras in the end game, though.
Yeah.
Again, like one of my biggest goals with this, and that I may be overshot, but who knows? I'm not going to go into specifics. But one of my biggest goals with mercenaries was that I just didn't want players to not care about them and stop using them. Like I wanted to
succeeded.
make sure. I want to make sure that they were useful.
I agree.
And then the other secondary goal was make sure that there's enough variance in them that you still want to try and grind and get the perfect one.
I think it got nailed because I
Yeah, you nailed
started using one intentionally that did damage because it was carrying early, and then like over the course of time I pulled a little bit of that out. I'm like, oh, this one's got like slightly worse damage abilities, but it brings an aura that I can't bring, so now I'm doing that. And then like now I'm in like end game min maxing, and I'm wearing, my Merc has like 2 auras, and I'm wearing a Victario's, and I got a Jinx Juju, and I anointed influence on it, so I'm like stacking its aura effect, and like so at all times I've been like,
I mean, using the Stampede
Don't
so
make
you
them
can
that
anoint
better.
more aura effect. Which I'm
Yep.
also doing.
Nice.
yeah, we've gone as
Yeah.
far as using Blight Boots to get a second anoint, and getting like corruptions on
So
common
good.
uniques to get like, oh, I can use this to res cap it, and then I can use, because of that I can use this extra curse ring, and then
I wish
it's
they
like it's fully
interacted
gearing
with.
it.
I wish they interacted with like +1 support, or like +1 corruptions and such, but they don't have actual gems in their gear. They have, I guess, they're
Yeah.
implanting their gems, which.
Sure, lore wise, sure.
Sure.
I mean, they don't have skill gems. They have
Yeah.
skills, which is also why, and this may not be clear to some people, but it's also why like +1 to level of all physical skill gems won't scale their skills because they don't have skill gems. They're not gems.
They
Yeah,
they
they'd
have
solve some
Parthen
of it.
gems, which are different.
But the Trothan gems are gems to us.
Actually, on the
But-
topic a little while ago of feedback that I didn't expect is so the rucksack, they're like little currency pocket thing.
Hmm.
When you click that, you get all the currency that's in it. You don't just get the one item.
Yeah.
And this was maybe not visually evident, so I did get a lot of people saying like, "Oh, that's a nice surprise." But then I got a lot of people who were like annoyed because not because they're getting more stuff, but because they like wanted to be able to click on the rucksack as a whole rather than having to click on one of the items in the rucksack. And so they couldn't click on one of the empty slots. And like I do get it, and we changed it so that you can do that. We changed it so you can do that, just to be clear. But
Hmm.
I never really understood why this was a concern. Like you just click one of the currency items. They all work.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I guess
Yeah.
because it gives you the wrong idea. If you're forced to click on a currency item, it gives you the impression that you are only going to get
Yeah.
that currency item.
now, to be clear, I'm not like defending the state it was in and saying it was better.
Hmm.
It is better now, but it's another thing where I would never have considered it. And it's part of the reason why when you're making stuff, when you're making creative stuff in general, but you know, I can really only speak to game design because that's what I've worked in. You just got to get it in front of other people, even when it's rough and jank and stuff. You know, admittedly, I can only get it in front of other people within the company because I work in a position where we can't just share things publicly immediately. But
We have broken the 2-hour mark at this point. But does anyone have any final comments, questions, anything that burning want to get said before we thank Octavian very much for his time and call it a pod?
excuse me.
I'm good, I think.
I'll throw out something crazy. Someone
sure.
in chat suggested itemizing mercenaries, and I think that's a human rights violation.
It does bring up some in-universe questions, yes.
I mean, we've had slaves before.
It brings up some in-universe questions.
Great class isn't the most ethical place in existence. It's certainly.
I mean, when you get to Act 2 in PoE2 and you go to like the front of the caravan, each of the characters has a different line for commenting on the fact that it's pulled by slaves. Yes.
Yeah. And
The
those
deepest-
slaves in PoE2, that base that is pulled by those slaves, it's not just, they don't just have a bunch of ropes. They're sewed into their body.
Oh, it's nasty.
It is
Not
rough.
a pleasant existence. No.
Rayclast is not a kind place.
Vaguely related to that, there was in PoE2, you know, the basically the first zone in Act 2 where you have like those desert guards who are guarding the caravan and fighting the hyenas and stuff, the allied ones. You used to be able to specter them if they died. You can. It was something that we pulled because it opened all sorts of lore implications and stuff. But yeah, I guess that's the closest we've come.
Final question, extremely critical, the most burning question I've had since forever. Why does temporal chains not affect the duration of time stop in PoE2? Why does the time curse not work with the time ascendancy?
I didn't even know that was the
information.
case.
This must be fixed. This is a travesty. The time curse and the time ascendancy don't work together. You've gone too far. This
Don't
has
mess
to be
with
stopped.
time.
I'll look into
Too
it.
much time.
Also, please don't do the math on whether or not you can get 100% uptime on time stop if temporal chains works.
See,
Don't worry
my
about
suspicion.
that. It's fine.
My suspicion is someone did the math.
Yeah.
And that's why.
I think he just answered his own question. What doesn't this work?
I can't comment on who did the math. But someone did do the math, and people at GGG know. But it wasn't noted internally at first, and now it is. So don't do the math. Just make the change and don't tell anyone. It's fine.
Yeah,
consider
don't
it.
wait for a release engineer.
I don't even look. You act like I know how to push something onto prod myself.
I'm sure you can work it out. It's fine. All right.
You definitely have the permission that you're not supposed to have.
Yeah.
Oh,
All right.
man.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for watching. This has been the first episode of the Laboratory. Hopefully we have more in the future. Whether or not we have the same people on board, who knows? Obviously, Octavian, you are welcome to come back if you're ever interested in having another discussion with us. Likewise with Bela and Jousis. I'll get it eventually. Jesus. I'll get it. Jesus, right? Yeah. Thanks everyone for watching. Have a good one, everyone.